So now we're going to take a look at Whitechapel and the context of Whitechapel and the problems the police faced. So you got, first of all, manpower issues, as in having enough staff. Overpopulated industrial cities led to huge amounts of poverty. This, combined with unemployment, caused slums, horrific living conditions, and there was simply not enough police to deal with the problem. Around 1,000 officers on duty at any time. The police force had around 13,000 officers in total to control a population of 5 million. The vast majority of this population were poverty-stricken, desperate members of the criminal underclass. In summary, it was a struggle to survive in Whitechapel. You also get controversial leadership, Sir Charles Warren. This creates distrust. People believe they are a controlling branch of the government. This is a lingering attitude, as in people see the police as there to control rather than help. This is exacerbated by the fact that Sir Charles Warren had a military background, and he also drafted in military help to police Whitechapel. Population distrusted uniform, believing it was a controlling arm of the government. For example, this was seen during the events of Bloody Sunday and Peterloo. The Bloody Sunday one, however, refers specifically to Whitechapel. The problems that the residents of Whitechapel faced was simply poverty. Create struggle, people steal to survive, cholera is rife because there's not clean water. This means that people steal clean water, disease spreads. In summary, people are desperate, living hand to mouth. You get the criminal underclass. At a time when being poor was believed to mean you were a bad person, people committed crime to survive, and they are not willing to inform on others. They distrust the police, so I'm not going to tell you anything about what's been going on. This will be a problem when we see the Jack the Ripper investigation, which meant a lot of the time police were just met with a wall of silence from witnesses and people they tried to speak to. This poverty and this desperation combines with alcoholism, because alcohol was affordable and readily available. Gin bars on every street. Water was contaminated, so people would drink gin instead. Alcohol consumption, though, leads to disorder. You also get drugs, such as lots of opium dens. People were desperate to escape the miserable reality of their lives. In addition to that, you get prostitution, rife due to necessity. Streetwalkers, desperation. People had nothing but their bodies to sell. There's then, obviously, with that comes incidents of violence. Many Whitechapel residents even engaged in what we called casual prostitution, as in to help them pay the rent, just get through the day. Also, brothels were very prominent. Fred Aberline of CID attempted to take prostitutes off the streets, and we'll discuss that more when we get to the Jack the Ripper investigation. You get the problem of unemployment. People live hand to mouth, as in, like, you get paid, you spend that money on food, and the food goes in your mouth. That's all people are striving to do. This labour took place in places such as the docks. Work is unstable and unreliable. You get in day-to-day contracts, week-to-week contracts, just getting enough money per day to pay your rent and pay for your food. The problem with this is sometimes people couldn't find work, and they have to find alternatives such as crime or prostitution. Orphans. Parents regularly died. It's harsh living conditions. There's disease, there's wars, there's all sorts that can end your life prematurely. The factory conditions. So parents died regularly. This was combined with a lack of contraception, meant there were many orphans in Whitechapel. Some lived on rooftops rather than go to the workhouse. Dr. Bernardo, who we'll get to later on, set up orphan houses to try and help the orphans. Sometimes, though, these orphans would be recruited into dens of thieves, effectively gangs that were then told to steal. Think like Oliver Twist, Artful Dodger. Another issue that caused problems for the police was immigration. Jews arrived in Whitechapel to escape persecution following the death or the assassination of Tsar Alexander II by a Jew in Eastern Europe. That led to pogroms across the East, meaning that Jews left to escape into Whitechapel. You also got Irish people leaving Ireland to look for work. This leads to massive racial tensions between the Irish immigrants, the Jewish, and the Whitechapel residents, who believed that immigrants were taking their jobs. This often led to clashes and street violence. Another issue in Whitechapel was overcrowding. 30,000 people occupying just 4,000 rooms. That means that on average, you've got about 8 people per room. This makes it easy to take from each other, easy to get angry with each other, and tension between neighbours. When everyone's struggling to survive, it's sort of every person for themselves. The rookeries, the geographical nature of Whitechapel, no lighting, and buildings were built close together. This leads to dark alleys, which were difficult to see down for the police. Criminals had lots of places to hide. This, combined with the violence of Whitechapel, made lots of areas simply unpoliceable and unsafe. Police, for example, wouldn't even go down some streets due to fear of attack. You get lodging houses, doss houses, which is if you couldn't afford your room for the night, you go to the doss house where you could rent the bed for the night or even just a few hours. This means there were coffin beds that we looked at. Far too many people living on top of each other. Coffin beds were 4p overnight for a place to sleep, and then we can see the other thing, the twopenny hangover. If you couldn't afford that, that's that piece of rope across the room that people would sleep on. Below that, you get later on, you get the Peabody estate, which was created later by an American philanthropist called George Peabody. More space, well planned, well built, and more affordable. Better living conditions for the poor. The idea being they basically knocked down loads of slums and built the Peabody estates to try and give people better lives and stop them committing crimes. So that's the living conditions. What were working conditions like in Whitechapel? In summary, unreliable. As I mentioned earlier, people just trying to get through the day. You're finding work for the day, often just enough to get your food and your bed for the night. Factories could hire and fire people whenever they wished, due to the fact that you've got more people than you have jobs available. This means people could be fired very easily because they could easily be replaced because they're working in unskilled labour. Working in railway construction or in the docks was varied work which left people uncertain when they would get a wage. This meant people often struggled to pay rent. People don't have savings because of the low wages and often had to rely on lines of credit from local shops to pay for things. So you go to the shop and you say, I'm getting paid on Friday, can I have some bread? You also get sweaty trades. Jobs such as tailoring, shoemaking and matchbox making meant people were overworked and exploited. Again, it's the idea of more workers than there are jobs available, so wages can be kept low. People would work long hours for low wages, sometimes up to 20 hours a day, then sleeping on shop floors. You see this particularly used to exploit immigrants new to the country, particularly immigrants who can't speak English and therefore cannot communicate with the police to tell them what's happening to them. You also then get workhouses, which were the conditions in which were deliberately kept bad, because workhouses is effectively your last resort. If you can't get a house, you can't afford a doss house, or rather, if you can't get a room in a house, if you can't afford the doss house, you went to the workhouse. The problem is if they made the workhouses too nice, people would just go there. So workhouse conditions were deliberately brutal to stop the poor simply going to them out of laziness, effectively. They offered food and shelter to those who were too poor to survive. Conditions were deliberately made bad to deter people from becoming poor. The workhouse was a last resort. Families were split up on arrival and people faced dehumanizing, tough manual labor. They were effectively elective prisons, as in you choose to go there, but it's brutal. And often only used because homelessness would lead to death. Workhouses also used corporal punishment alongside a Christian ethos, believing that people had ended up poor due to their sins, the belief in a criminal underclass. Then you get orphanages. Orphanages meant kids didn't have to experience the workhouse. Sometimes a lot of kids would have done, and that's linked to the work of Dr. Bernardo. These orphanages are linked to the work of Dr. Bernardo, a philanthropist who created a special school for children, and in 1870 he opened a boys' orphanage followed by a girls' one. He said no destitute child will ever be refused. He set these up after visiting one of the Whitechapel rooftops and seeing lots of children having to sleep on the roof.